Again, hi everyone. Thank you again so much for joining today's session. I am so excited to get to introduce Quarto today, and many thanks to Laura and all the Our Lady St. Louis co-organizers for having me today. Just a little bit on what is going to happen today. A brief overview of the agenda. We're going to talk about Quarto, start talking about how to actually use the tool, and once we get familiarized with the tool itself, how to get started, and some extra things that I think are just so much fun and engaging about Quarto. Even in creating this presentation, I learned so much because there is so much to do. And I'm just very, very excited to get to share it with you. So Laura, thanks again for the introduction, but just for the recording as well, my name is Isabella Velásquez. I work at RStudio, which is soon to be Posit. I've been an R user for many years, and I am a co-organizer for Our Lady Seattle as well. And just a bit about me, I live in Seattle. I'm a very avid hiker. I love my cat as well. Her name is Kitty, and she's a tortoiseshell cat as well. I am also a digital illustration beginner, as you will see throughout the presentation today. So you have a few options of how to attend this session. There are some links that you might be interested in. First up is these slides are available on Quarto Pub, and they will remain up after the session as well. You can feel free to go into them and look through as you'd like. The source repo and instructions for today's session are on GitHub, which you can find at this link. So if you're interested in seeing how any of the slides were created or anything like that, again, the repo will stay up after this session. There's also an exercise repo, which just contains some modified files and images and other source code that might be helpful as we're going through the exercises today. The README of this repo also has a lot of resources that might be helpful for the future and for reference. And so if you already have a local copy of these exercises already, that's great. When we get to the different sections, you can follow along with what I am doing on your own RStudio. But another option is that you can sign up for RStudio Cloud and go into the project linked here to follow along. And so one benefit of this is that you don't have to have RStudio installed on your computer, and the project is ready to go. Like, it already has the packages that you need installed for you, and you can save a copy of your own work if you're interested in looking at it in the future. But another option as well is just sit back and just watch the session and try things out on your own afterwards. Like I mentioned, all of this will be available. The recording will be on YouTube. And so if you are going to try to follow along with the exercises, you please make sure that you're on the latest version of RStudio, which is version 2022.07 or later, and then have the copy of the exercise repo on your desktop, or access the RStudio.cloud account. And one final thing is also have a Quarto Pub account available and that you have signed up on. All right, so now let's get started. Let's talk about Quarto. So what is Quarto? Quarto is an open source scientific and technical publishing system built on Pandoc. If you go to quarto.org, which is the official website of Quarto, that's going to be the first line that you see. But let's break this down. So open source. Open source means that RStudio believes that it's better for everyone if tools used for research and science are free and open. And free software means more reproducibility, more widespread sharing of knowledge and techniques, and the elimination of cost barriers. And it also means that you can see the source code. You can go to Quarto on GitHub, check out how the developers are building the tool and contribute. If you have questions, you can file a discussion. If you run into issues, you can file an issue and just generally contribute to Quarto and the open source community. So scientific and technical. Yeah, scientific and technical. So scientific and technical means that Quarto has specific things for journal articles or scientific papers, like support for code execution and citations and footnotes and scientific markdown, cross-references. There's so many things, and we'll be showing some of these later on, but Quarto definitely has the scientific publishing audience in mind. For a publishing system, what that means is Quarto is a tool for writing dynamic documents that combine code and code output and text. And it can embed output from Python, R, Julia, and Observable. And Quarto can be rendered to create very high quality articles, reports, presentations, websites, and blogs, and books in a variety of formats such as HTML, PDF, Microsoft Word, EPUB, and more. And built on Pandoc. So Pandoc is a tool working behind the scenes to change Quarto documents into their finalized format. And Quarto documents are authored with Markdown, which is a plain text format. But Pandoc Markdown is very rich, and it lets you control your documents in very specific ways. And so while also being pretty easy to read and write, and we'll cover this as well. All right, so where did Quarto come from? So Quarto is an open source project that's sponsored by RStudio PVC. It came after 10 years of experience with R Markdown, which is a file format for making dynamic documents with R. However, to use R Markdown, you need to call it from R, and it's dependent on the knitr engine, again, that requires R. So if you're a Python user, it means that you need to install R to be able to use R Markdown. And Quarto is instead a tool that you can call from the terminal or the command line. It's completely independent from the computational systems, and while also supporting different computational systems as well. So in the case of R Markdown, Quarto also supports knitr, and it can support other ones as well. And so because of this, you can think of Quarto as the next generation of R Markdown in that it's fundamentally multi-language and multi-engine. And that was the thinking behind the conception of this project. And I do want to note, JJ Allaire, RStudio CEO, gave a keynote at R Medicine recently where he covers these Quarto origins, and I highly recommend checking it out. It's a fantastic keynote. So what are Quarto goals? So the goals, again, are to create these dynamic documents that are reproducible and can be automated. So if, just to give an example, in my very first job, if I wanted to create some kind of data analysis report, I had to go to Microsoft Access, run a query, and download it to Excel. And from Excel, I did a bunch of computation, and I was a very beginner R user. And so I would do some things in R and then copy and paste that back into Excel. And then from there, then I would type up the results in Word, but then some people wanted a dashboard. And so then I had to go into Tableau to create it. So as you can imagine, it can be very difficult to make a document for analysis or for science. And so one of Quarto's goal is to kind of reduce how difficult it is to do that. And then Quarto also attempts to enable single source publishing. So again, in many cases, you need to create lots of different outputs and things like what's on the web, things that are printed, things that are on your cell phone. And so the ability is to make all these publications from one source. And so Quarto sits inside the big and broad literate programming world, which mixes narrative and text form with code or formatted outputs like documents and which mixes narrative and text form with code to create formatted outputs like documents and web pages and more. So this is like a new tool for literate programming. There are lots of other literate programming systems that support computation, like R Markdown and Org Mode and JupyterBook, and now there is also Quarto. So if there are already literate programming tools, why create a new one? So like mentioned earlier, Quarto was built from the start to support multiple computational systems and ecosystems. And so it's expanded upon what we've learned to add new languages now, and then be able to add more languages in the future. And so it's a system that attempts to bring R Markdown to everybody. And you may be wondering, why is it called Quarto? And if you go on the quarto.org website, the developers state that they wanted to use a name that had meaning in the history of publishing, and ultimately they landed on Quarto. And a Quarto is an 8-page double-sided booklet made by folding a single sheet of paper into 4 sections, like so. And so what are the things that Quarto can make? So one example is Quarto websites like this one from NVDev. And so it has a lot of flexibility in creating websites and rendering output the way that you want to see it. Quarto also supports making of books, such as this one, which is Python for Data Analysis by Wes McKinney. And books are a special kind of website, and they can be, there can be chapters and cross-references within the books, but another special feature about books is that they can be rendered into the sort of output that you need in order to print a book, such as Word or PDF, etc. Quarto can also make blogs, which again is another form of website that also enables listings of different posts organized and categorized by date or topics, and also provides things like subscription and RSS feeds. Quarto also allows you to create presentations like this one right here. And it has a lot of really like a very deep and rich feature set for presentations, and making you know, the customization of both the look and the output is pretty incredible. And since Quarto has a scientific publishing audience in mind, there is also a lot of support for creating journal articles specified to like the requirements of a particular journal. And it also is able to flexibly adapt LaTeX and the templates that you need in order to submit a paper. So how does Quarto work? So Quarto works, this is a simplification, like a diagram of how Quarto works. An engine is the tool that runs code. And so for R Markdown, it is knitr, and Quarto also supports knitr. And so this is the underlying structure. It creates the documents from the source. In this case, the source would be a Quarto document or a QMD file. When we render a Quarto document first, the knitr engine executes all of the code chunks and generates an intermediary Markdown file. And that Markdown file includes both code and code output. Then that Markdown file is processed by Pandoc to create the finished product, and in the variety of formats that you need. And just a note, since Quarto supports knitr, most R Markdown files can actually be used unmodified with Quarto as well. And in terms of what this looks like, this is a Quarto document with the extension QMD on the left, along with the rendered version as HTML on the right. And you can also choose to render it to other formats like PDF, Microsoft Word, etc. And so this is a basic model of Quarto publishing. Take a source document and render it to a variety of output formats. And we won't be touching too much about Python today, but just wanted to note the structure is very similar for Jupyter. So we're running documents through the Jupyter engine instead of the knitr engine. And like R Markdown, you can run Jupyter notebooks with Quarto as well. And just note too that the Jupyter engine will support any other language that has a Jupyter kernel. And right now there's a lot of Quarto functionality for Python and for Julia through Jupyter. But this is part of the multilingualism that we discussed earlier. You can keep adding languages if you swap out different engines. And what this also means is that you can have shared syntax and formats across languages since the backend is all the same. And so here's an example of a Jupyter, a Quarto document that runs with the Jupyter engine. You can see that Jupyter is specifically like noted in the top. And but if you look at, besides the code, it actually looks very, very similar to that NIDAR, the previous Quarto document that is running through NIDAR. And so Quarto also has native support for Observable.js, which is a set of enhancements to Vanilla.js or JavaScript. So Observable has a reactive runtime. So this means you can interactively work with data within your Quarto documents. So that's just to show an example. If I click into here, this is the example from the Quarto documentation. And as you can see, here is some charts. And I can change the output of the charts, and this is all within the browser. And doesn't have to be embedded or anything. It is running natively within Quarto. And so Quarto also supports other reactive elements such as HTML widgets and Shiny for Python and Shiny. And but just as an example, this is what it looks like in Observable.js. All right, so this is all good and well, but you might be wondering, should you switch to Quarto if you already have another tool that you really like? And so here are just some considerations for you as you're making that decision. So Quarto has shared expression for core features. So if you used packages from our Markdown ecosystem, you often had to switch between different ways of doing the same thing, depending on the package that you're working in. And in Quarto, what a shared core syntax means is that it's the same across all formats, whether you're making a website or a book or a presentation. So making a tab set and code folding and cross-references are all done in the same way. And so another example is that Quarto also has a universal theming system that's based on SCSS, I think it's pronounced S, for all HTML output where core variables are defined by a package called bslib. And so what that means is that theming is compatible with Shiny, Flex Dashboard, and our Markdown themes. And so generally what all this means is that with Quarto, users can be very consistent and organized across content. So our Markdown isn't going away, but the big new features will be in Quarto from here on out. And there is a lot of them. And then we will cover some of these today. And so that's just another thing to keep in mind. Of course, keep using our Markdown if it works for your needs. But if you are interested in taking advantage of the new features that come in this world, that you might consider switching to Quarto. So another reason you may consider Quarto is Quarto also supports extensions, extensions are written in Lua. And so because they're written in Lua, it means that they're not language specific. So you can use the same extension in a Jupyter file or a NIDAR file. And there are various different kinds of extensions. So there are shortcodes, which let you add content like font awesome icons, which you may have seen when I linked to my Twitter. Here's another one that takes a JavaScript code written by Nikki Chase and creates an extension so that you can kind of open up text within your Quarto document. It's pretty neat. And other kinds of examples of shortcodes are embedding YouTube videos, etc. These extensions can also be different journal templates, again, for the submission of journal articles. Another one is custom formats. And so here is a really neat one that looks like an NES presentation. And then there are also kinds of filters that let you add Markdown syntax for extended features, such as being able to add text on the side of your slide if you so choose. Okay, so hopefully that was a good introduction about what Quarto is and why you might consider using it and the exciting things that are coming up. Are there any questions so far that I can help answer?
I haven't seen any in the chat so far.
Awesome.
Oh, actually, it looks like we do have one. Go ahead.
Do you want me to use voice or?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So just very simply, in terms of interactivity with Quarto, it has observable, it has Lua, it has all these different ones, but I only know about R and Python. So from that perspective, what I'm trying to understand is, with these new features, does it allow me to have something like a simpler interactivity so I can get, especially non-coders, their feet kind of wet in terms of what interactivity is, without throwing them and then showing it immediately a very complex model and something like a COVID-19 dashboard, you know? That way to increase adoption and stuff. So that's what I'm trying to think about is, are there any of these new ways of outputting where essentially our Markdown notebooks in a way that has a simpler form of interactivity? Thanks to Quarto.
Yeah, and by simpler, do you mean that like folks don't need to install anything else, or
less infrastructure
on
the front end?
Yeah, so I think part of like the development of Quarto was to reduce like the infrastructure that you need to create the sort of documents that you want. And yes, Lua filters, etc. Like those are all extensions to kind of add on. But even Quarto has, once you install it, you can essentially start using Quarto like right out of the box, and we'll cover this in a bit. And in terms of like these kind of questions of like, what package do I use to do X or Y? Part of the goal is kind of to eliminate those questions, because the answer is like everything is built in within Quarto itself.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cool. Awesome. All right, so we just talked about like, what is Quarto and where did it come from, etc. Let's talk about how to actually use Quarto. And so when you go to quarto.org and click Get Started, the very first thing that you see is the option to install Quarto. And so this is installing the Quarto CLI, and this is all that you need to actually run Quarto. You can run Quarto through your terminal or your command line interface for everything that Explore. But if you're going to run code, then you'll also need to install the engines that you are using for your computation. But there are a lot of tools that can also help you and assist in writing Quarto documents and making it a bit easier. And part of the multilingualism of Quarto is that you are not tied to one tool. And Quarto is meant to be for collaboration either within data science teams or across data science teams. So if someone is familiar with JupyterLab, but somebody else likes to work in RStudio, they can still work on the same Quarto documents without having to switch to one tool or the other. And for RStudio users, Quarto is bundled and pre-installed with the version 2022.07 or later. And as you can imagine, RStudio has invested a lot of features that are built into RStudio for Quarto documents. And these extensions are not limited just to the RStudio IDE. And so VS Code has an extension. So to use a lot of these features and such as like YAML completion and linting and other features that we'll talk about in a bit. And in Jupyter Notebooks and Jupyter Labs, you can run Quarto preview and see your document. So it extends beyond just the RStudio. When you're working in RStudio, you can use this render button to render the file, or in other words, that means take it through that process of converting the source document to Markdown, processing in Pandoc, and creating the final document. And once you click render, you can see the output of your document with that single click. And if you're familiar with R Markdown, it's where the knit button would show for those documents. And in the RStudio IDE, you can click render on save so that anytime you save your document, you can see your changes automatically side by side with your source code. And the render on save also works for HTML and PDF output. Another neat feature is this YAML intelligence. And what this means, it's available in RStudio and VS Code. And so what this means is completion and diagnostics for errors. And so it's available for YAML front matter, project files, cell options, etc. So if you have experience of writing YAML, you may know like the pain of writing YAML incorrectly and having no idea what the error message says. And so this attempts to alleviate that. So let's try what this first part. Ooh. I use Zoom every day and it's still a mystery to me. So I'm going into my RStudio cloud project, and because I haven't been using it for a bit, it went to sleep. So I'm just resuming the project now. If you go into that RStudio cloud link and have an account and sign in, hopefully this is exactly what you will see once it loads. So this is like RStudio, but in the cloud. It should come pre-installed with all the packages that you need in order to render this Quarto file. And I included this here for anybody who wants to follow along on their local computer, but we don't need that. So this is an example Quarto document, similar to the one that I showed you earlier. You can see that there's a mix of text and code, and the extension up above says QMD. And so I'm going to click render here. And from here, it should render the Quarto document. And here it is. I can see exactly what it is that my code output in the Quarto document itself. One small thing is, if you notice, that opened up in a new window. And if you don't want that, you can actually change the settings. And I'm going to do that by clicking on this little gear and then scrolling to preview and viewer pane. And that way I can just stay within this window. I'm just going to re-render so I can show you. And like I mentioned, in RStudio, on the local desktop, you should also have a render on save option that you can check off. And so if you make a change and render, make a change and save, it will re-render and show you the updated output. And so going back into this YAML intelligence, I thought I had a link here, but I did not. And so there are a lot of options for YAML. If you start writing in an example like that you want to include in your YAML, that YAML intelligence will automatically kick in. So let's say we want to add a subtitle. I'm going to start sub, just with 3 characters in, and I can see subtitle kind of pop up. I press enter, and it auto completes, and I could say intro Quarto workshop and save. When I re-render, here it is, the subtitle that I just entered. So if you do something incorrect, like I mentioned, there are also diagnostics for errors. So let's say we want to add a table of content. And if you don't see like the options pop up, you can also click tab and all of them will pop up. So TOC stands for table of content. And then when I press enter, it will tell me like if there are sort of options to just choose from. I could just like select it from there. So for example, true, but let's say like I, have it like written such that it's not complete. I can press tab and it will auto-complete as well. Going to render. In this case, you do have to kind of pop it up to see what happens, but the table of content is now available here. So that's rendering and the YAML intelligence. And we can go back to the presentation. So opening up that document, you may have noticed the way that the document looks. RStudio has two options for editing documents. So there's a visual on the left and source on the right. So the visual editor offers a what you see is what you mean authoring experience for Markdown. So when you're formatting text, you have various options. You can use the editor toolbar, which is up top on the top of the RStudio above the window. You can use a keyboard shortcut like Control-B to bold text, or you can use Markdown. So in Markdown, to bold text, you use 2 asterisks. And so the everything is saved on the back end. And so if you wanted to use a visual editor, edit your code, but then for some reason you're like, oh, I would like to see what the Markdown looks like, you can switch back into source and back again, depending on your needs. So let's try this and see what that looks like. So back in my RStudio Cloud, you can see that visual is toggled on. And so let's go through those examples that I just gave. So first, we can use this editor toolbar, which is up top. And I'm going to click Insert and Link. This pop-up is going to come up and it's going to ask me, what are the things that I want to link to? And so I'm going to put TPS, Quarto.org, and then the text. And you can fill out as much as you would like, and then click OK. And then what you see is what you get sort of feature means is this like, as opposed to seeing like the code behind what I just did, I would see exactly what I would expect to see in a website, for example. The other option is using your keyboard shortcuts. And so bold text, you may be familiar with this, like I highlight the text that I would like to have bold and I click Command B. Oop, not on the website. And then that text is simply bold. And then that final option is just using Markdown. So a heading in Markdown, it starts with a number of pound signs. So I'm going to do a heading 2, which is 2 pound signs. When I click space, it automatically shows me what it is that I'm creating. In this case, I'm creating a heading 2, and I could type it in. And I don't have to do anything more than that. I can see what it is that I just typed out in Markdown. And if I want to switch back to source, I can click on source here on the left, and I can see the Markdown version of everything that I just did at the link, the bold text, and the heading, and then work from there. Any questions so far on working in RStudio with Quarto? Okay, if not, let's talk about the content of a Quarto document, which contains 3 main types: a YAML header, code chunks, and then Markdown text. So YAML stands for yet another markup language, or YAML ain't a markup language. I don't know what the truth is, but it has two different names. And so Quarto documents usually start with a YAML header. They are optional, but this is pretty common, especially because of all the functionality that it has, as we'll see in a bit. YAML is demarcated by 3 dashes on either end. And the basic syntax of YAML is key value pairs in the format key : value. And so in this example, we see that the key in this case is title and the value is hello Quarto. And what the YAML does is it contains the output of your document and also important metadata like the title and the author. And so this is the document that, if you have it downloaded or just started off with, is the default YAML, but then you can just continue adding to the YAML all the different things that it is that you need. And YAML, like most common, is things like title, date, author, but it's very, very extensive in terms of the things that you want to do. And if you go into the documentation for the Quarto website on this reference tab, there is a lot of things that you can consider doing. Like I said, it's very extensive, the things that you can do in the YAML. And if you ever find yourself like wondering like, oh, you know, what if I want to have a different title for the table of contents? This reference is very useful for that. And so we've already like tried a couple of things in the YAML, but let's see if I can just do this from memory. If you want to add like more specific things into your YAML, and in this case, like I did set table of contents is true, but I want to add this death attribute, and the YAML completion is very helpful for this because sometimes it's really hard to remember what things are called and things like that. And I can use the YAML intelligence to kind of create the sort of customization that it is that I want. Oops. And it tells me that I made a mistake, so my bad. But this is a very helpful error in that it tells me it's because of the YAML and not something in my document. And so the second part of Quarto documents are the code chunks. And so code chunks are identified by 3 backticks, the language and curly brackets, and they can also have optional chunk options identified by this hash pipe right here, this # and then this pipe symbol. And yeah, and those are included within the chunk itself. If you're coming from the R Markdown world, you might be more familiar with this sort of syntax where the chunk options are within the line with the 3 dashes and the programming language itself, and then also using an equal sign. But things are slightly different with Quarto. Moving in there, like the options have moved to within the code chunk itself. Now the chunk options also mirror what YAML looks like with the : sign and without commas, for example. And there are a variety of different reasons that the Quarto does this. First of all is, again, the consistency across languages. So this looks the same whether you're writing in R or in Python. The second reason is without having to kind of switch between YAML and the code chunk style, it tends to make it a bit easier to write. And then the third reason is, say you have something really, really long that you want to add into your chunk option, having it in one line makes it very difficult to read. But with this new syntax, you can have everything within your code chunks. You can change the format so that, in this case, we're adding alt text to the figure, and we can make it as long as we want without losing track of what we're writing, and just generally like a little bit more ease of use. And so for the RStudio IDE, you can render the complete document like we just did in Quarto, but you can also run each chunk interactively in the editor by either clicking that little arrow sign or using the keyboard shortcut Shift, Command, Enter. And so it displays the code either inline or within your console, whatever your preference is. So just to demonstrate that very quickly, I'm going to fix my incorrect YAML. And I'm going to load my libraries. And so here is the little arrow sign that I mentioned that one can run, and then the output displays underneath that chunk. So continuing on code chunks, there are other things that you can do as well. So you can also include cross-referencing. Apologies, it did not add the comment that I had, but in this case, you can see that the label for this plot is fig-penguins. And so I am going to just show you how to do it here. And clean this up to make it a bit easier to read. This label is fig penguins, and so I can take that and say, I want to refer to it somewhere else in the document and have people go to it if they need this a plot. I can use the @ sign and then reference that the name of that plot based on its label. When I render it, here is the cross-reference. And if I click here, it takes me up to that part of the document that shows the plot that I was referencing. And so here's just an example of what the output is. Quarto also gives you a lot of different flexibility with your plot outputs. One really neat thing is being able to lay out your plots side by side by configuring this layout and call chunk option. So in this case, we want our two plots to be side by side. And so we can just add that in with the hash pipe. And so if we go ahead and do that. And I need to put that in a chunk. And click render. Pop it out so you can see it. Here are my two plots side by side. And Quarto also has, like I mentioned, a lot of different customization. And so in that case, that by default, put the two plots side by side, but say I want to make one of the plots slightly smaller than the other plots. And so I can configure that by under layout using this syntax. And so in this case, I'm saying I want plot 1 to take up 30% of the space and plot 2 to take up 70% of the space. And so let's see what this looks like. Also. And I have my output here, we should refresh. And here we go. Here are the two plots with one taking up 30% of the space and the other one taking 70% of the space. And in the Quarto documentation, it shows you all sorts of things that you can do with layout options. You can add negative space, you can put them on different rows, you can have one plot take up 50%, the other plot take up 50%, and the one underneath it taking up the whole space. It's very, very customizable. And again, if you are coming from the R Markdown world or in general just are wondering, what if I want the same code option for all of my code chunks, not just one particular one? In this case, code chunk echo means that whether or not it shows the code when you render the document. So for with one chunk, you use a chunk option using the hash pipe inside the chunk itself, but you can also configure it for all chunks by adding it to your YAML under execute. And so in this case, by saying execute echo equals false or colon false, then that means for all of your code chunks, it will not show, it won't show the code when you render it. And just in general, there's so many other kind of features that you can do to configure your code chunks. You could enable code folding, which lets you like by default not see the code, but somebody can click into it and open it up in case they are interested in the code. There's also code tools, which allow you to link to the source code. And so that's very helpful. Say you want somebody to read your presentation or your document or things like that, but be able to access the source code if they so like. And then there's also this other neat feature called code linking, and using the download package, as long as it's installed, you can actually make it so that when somebody looks at your code, they can click into the different functions and open up the different documentation. Awesome. Any questions so far? Okay. Cool.
There are a few in the chat, but I think well, one quick one. If you can see the chat, Isabella, there's a question about the hash pipe. Whether is the sign used just for comments or just like the hash and R for comments. You might have to look at it. We can also wait until the end.
Oh, sure. Well, I can answer the hash pipe one really fast. And so it is used for code chunk options. And so so not for regular comments. You could use the pound sign for comments in Quarto as well. Another format that I have seen that maybe we can just check it. Let's go here. One thing is, like, if I don't know how to write something in Markdown, that I like to do is go into the visual mode. And then I'd say insert, and then there's comment. Oh, and so here's the answer. So to make a comment in Quarto, you can do, I guess, like the lesson sign, exclamation point, dash, dash, pound. I'm assuming you write the comment in here. Yeah. But this hash pipe is specifically just for code chunks. So just to note that. And going back into the source, you can see this is what it looks like. And just to confirm, we render it. Yep, and it does not show up. All right, cool. I will continue then with Markdown text. So Markdown is a lightweight markup language for creating formatted text using a plain text editor. And so this is what Quarto uses for the syntax that Quarto uses for text, like we just saw. Again, you may have seen this before. If you're using the visual editor, you usually don't have to learn that much Markdown syntax for authoring your documents, because you could just use the editor and the menus and for all sorts of things. But if you're using the source editor, you can write these Markdown expressions by using like the Markdown notation. So in this case, for example, using the backtick around penguins, renders penguins in this kind of code format, adding links with square brackets and then parentheses with the link inside. And so that renders like so. Another thing to note is that you can have inline code in Quarto, like you could in R Markdown. So as long as you have R installed and knitr installed as well. In this case, what this line is doing is that it is reading The penguins data set, it's counting the number of rows by using the R function nRow, and then it outputs that within the document itself as a number, as opposed to the code. And this is incredibly helpful, as you can imagine, especially if your data is like constantly changing and things like that, to be able to programmatically write your documents as opposed to having to manually update it every time that your data changes or things like that. There's a ton of Markdown syntax, and again, the Quarto documentation has a lot of examples for you, but just to get a sense of what it looks like if you're not familiar, you use specific, different notation to output the sort of thing that you would like. In addition, it can also do things like links and photos that are links, etc. And Markdown also allows you to write tables, and depending on how you write the table, you can customize what the table looks like. And again, if you're using the RStudio visual editor, that's actually like usually how I write my Markdown tables now, because it makes it pretty easy. There are also Markdown table generators on the internet that you can search for and input your data so that it looks the way that you would like it to look. And there's also customization for the tables as well, like being able to add a title to your table or specifying how big your widths are and things like that. And so, like I mentioned, there are a lot of options for Markdown basics. And so if you want to take a look at the chapter in the Quarto documentation, they kind of go through all the different things. Well, maybe not all the things, but lots of things that you can do with Markdown. And you would just type this code in whenever you are writing your document or using the visual editor. So just to give an example of that table, I'm going to go back to visual mode. And down here. And here you could say table, insert table. And in this case, you can specify the numbers of rows and columns that you would like and the caption. And this gives you like a familiar kind of table look where you can, write in your text. I'm just going to put it in letters. And there you have a table. Going back to source, you can see what it looks like in the Markdown format, and rendering gives you the output in your Quarto document as well. Like so. I wanted to also note some of the native features that Quarto has for when you are writing documents. One example is diagrams. So there's native support for diagrams. And if you notice, the syntax is pretty similar to whenever you write R or Python code. But in this case, the execution is being run by Quarto. And so this is an example of a mermaid diagram. And Mermaid is a project supported on GitHub as well. So you could use it in GitHub documents. And so as you can imagine, it's probably going to be a very handy tool to know. And it just makes diagram creation like fairly easy. And again, this is like natively within Quarto, like it's not an image or anything like that. Quarto allows you to write equations. You use the two dollar signs and then write the equation inside to be able to render what you would like. For Quarto documents, you can also include a formatted title banner at the top of the article, again, to make it look, quite nice. The way that you can do that is first you toggle it on by using the YAML expression title block banner, and it's true. This will give you a default color. So say you want to customize it, you can say a specific color that you would like. You could give it the hex code to be able to do that. And it also supports images as well. And so in the repo that I provided, I actually included one of the images. So if you'd like to try it, you could go here, title block banner, and then the name of the image. I'm just going to double check that that's what it's called. Yes, render. there we go. If you'd like to see it. Now I have this this banner image of the penguins. More penguins. I'm just trying to make my window a little bigger. Whoop, did not work. So another really awesome feature of Quarto is being able to customize your text using divs and spans. And this adds a ton of functionality. A lot of the things that you may have noticed in this presentation today are done using these divs and spans. So the div is like first you use 3 colons to start the div off. You add a label if you so choose, a class which denotes the behavior, and then attribute that just further customizes the things that you would like. So one example of a div is creating a callout block. And so again, this is just a way of modifying the structure of your documents. And so it is like wrapping this particular piece of content with HTML, but it can also be used in PDFs and Word, etc. And so a callout is a special form of content for your readers. So like that they really notice something that you have written down or a warning or etc. And you may have seen them before in papers and books. So the rendering of this div ends up with this tip and in this special callout block that might be helpful for people reading your documents. And like I mentioned, you can actually customize callout blocks a bit. In this case, saying that we want the appearance to be simple. And the Quarto documentation also kind of lists out all the different options that you have for this. Don't feel like you need to memorize them all. But just to give a further example, this is what it looks like if you do a warning call out or caution call out, the different kinds of looks. And so that's all available with that div itself. So another example of divs is putting things in multiple columns. So in this case, we have a photo and we have text, and we would like to put them side by side, kind of similar to how we did with the plots. And so rendering this gives us this output with the photo on one side and the text on the other side. And as you can imagine, there's also a lot of customization features for this as well. Kind of similar to what we've seen before, we could say like we want one to take up 70% of the space and 30% of the space. And so let's just see what that ends up looking like. That is this example here. Oop. Oh, I don't know what I did. Can you still see my screen okay?
We can just see you now, or at least I can just see you.
Oh no. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Sorry about that. I think I did not copy. If I go here and copy that that I have, so this is going to put this penguin.jpg image, one taking up 70%, one taking 30%, and then the third one taking up 100% in this layout. So let's render that and see what it looks like. And so here we go. This one's in the middle. This one is taking up 70% of the space, and this one's taking up 100% of the space. And again, there's just so many different ways of going about this, depending on what you would like. This is a negative space that I mentioned earlier, kind of just like adding on. And yeah, it's pretty neat what you can do with divs. Another feature that you can do with divs is this tab set. So putting different parts of content under different tabs that your readers can kind of click through if they would like. So in this case, we have a tab set where the title of the tab is denoted with this with this pound sign, and then the content inside between the two headings. And so in this case, we can see what it looks like in R. what it looks like in Python when I click and back. And so this is pretty helpful if you want to show your audience like different options or things like that, different languages or etc. And then you can also apply styles to inline text, creating these spans. And so spans are denoted with square brackets that surround the text and curly brackets for the style that you would like. So in this case, this text that is red, as you can imagine, the red is surrounded by the square brackets. The style that we would like is in the curly brackets right next to it. When we render it, we can see the red word is now red. And another really common use of spans is for alt text. And so by adding fig alt after a image, you can add it with that span. And one thing to note too is with spans, you actually can do multiple at once. In this case, we want to modify the width as well as add alt text, and you could do that just within a single span.
Isabella, should we take a quick break for a few minutes?
Oh yeah,
Give people a chance to stretch their legs for a moment.
yes, awesome.
So why don't we come back at maybe like 7:10-ish?
Sounds perfect. I'm happy to stay here too.
Yeah, Ryan had a really interesting question in the chat. And I'm super interested in as well, which is, are there any tools to help you convert your Markdown files into Quarto?
There are. Let me.
Yes. Thank God.
Yeah, of course. So, so again, Quarto runs knitr, and therefore usually can run Markdown or our Markdown text without any sort of modifications. So one example is when I was converting my blog from blog down to our Markdown, I just like copy and pasted that post folder and just dropped it into my new structure. However, that isn't always the case because, as you saw, like some of the YAML can be a little bit different. And if there are things that are specific, like particularly with blog down, there were some things that were specific to blog down, so I had to kind of like troubleshoot those specific errors. But I'm trying to figure out, remember what version it is. In the knitr package, there is actually a new function that allows you to, yes, the 1.4 release. And we actually wrote a piece on it. So I could show that really quick. So there's this function called convert chunk header. And what that does is, sorry, this is a little small. No, it won't let me. So what this does is it takes like all of those chunks that use like the equal signs and the commas, etc., and then converts it to this Quarto format. And so that's very helpful. Like if you're thinking ahead and you're like, oh, I want to use, the Quarto format from here on out, it makes it very easy. You can overwrite the input or just give it a different name and things like that. And then there are a series of Quarto conversion tools that are kind of in progress for like specific things like, oh, I have a distill site, like how do I convert it and things like that. But some of them are still in progress.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. That's so helpful.
Yeah, of course. Any
All
other
right.
questions I can answer?
Or take a break, feel free.
Okay,
Sure. You deserve a break too. right, how do we feel about getting started again?
I feel good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Awesome. 1 second. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yep, we're good.
Thank you. Awesome. So we just covered div and spans and all the really awesome things that you could do with them. So I had mentioned before that Quarto can be used to create all sorts of different formats. One such example is the Reveal.js presentations, such as this presentation that you're seeing right now. So let's see what it means to convert a Quarto document into a Reveal.js presentation. And I probably gave it away with the code that's shown there, but it is fairly straightforward. Of course, there are some things that are specific to documents, so I'm just going to clean this up really fast. But as we can see here, format is listed as HTML, which tells us, we want this to be an HTML document. Say we want this to be a presentation now. Oh, and that was an example of the YAML error diagnostics. I don't know why it wasn't popping up earlier, but it's saying key value, key format has an empty value, but it must instead have some sort of value. And so it lets you know, hey, something's up with your YAML. So that's very handy. And so I'm going to switch from HTML to Reveal.js, press enter. Oop. Markdown format changes require reload, so I'll just reload. All right, so rendering now. Let's see what happens. So with that, we are able to convert our document into a Reveal.js presentation. And so this brings it back to like this kind of batteries included sort of feature set that Quarto has. So instead of having to install a separate package to create a slide deck, all you had to do is change the output format. And it shows all the things that we had in our document. Of course, our document was not meant to be a slide deck, and so it's a little bit, this plot is kind of like outside of the margins, but all of the things that we included before suddenly show up in the Reveal.js format. And in terms of how to write these, you may have noticed that the each slide is denoted by each different heading. And so Meet Quarto shows you this text right here. Meet the Penguins shows you all the text or all the content between Meet the Penguins and the next heading, which would be heading 2. And so you can start building out your slide deck this way. And most of the core capabilities of Quarto HTML code blocks are available for Reveal.js slides, such as code folding and code copy, etc. But Reveal.js also has some functionality not available in documents. One of these are code line highlighting. So this lets you highlight specific lines of code output. And then, as you can imagine, for teaching or things like that, this is very helpful to kind of show a progression of steps. So in this case, we're saying code line numbers 3 to 4. So all of the other chunks of code are kind of like in this lighter text, whereas 3 and 4, line 3 and 4 are kind of highlighted so that they really stick out. And another example of things that are available in Reveal.js that are not available in the documents are like being able to go through a bullet list incrementally. And so in this case, like you may have seen this during this presentation, just being able to click through each of the different bullet points as opposed to having them all show up at once. So hopefully that gives you a good starter on how to use Quarto, how to add different types of content and style them the way that you would like. In terms of getting started with Quarto, you can create a new document by going to RStudio and going to File, New File, Quarto Document. Oop, and the document will be created. It'll be kind of empty, so it wouldn't be like really that exciting until you start adding content. But now you can do that using all the things that we talked about before. And so I also wanted to talk about Quarto projects. And so Quarto projects are directories that, first of all, they let you render all or some of the files in a single command. For example, in a blog, say you changed your title page, you changed some of your posts, you can render all of those files with a single command if they are all within a project. So Quarto render my project. They also let you share YAML across multiple documents. So again, in an example of a blog, you want all of your posts to have the same theme, then you can configure that in this YAML metadata file, as opposed to having to include that in each individual file. So Quarto projects are helpful for that. They let you redirect output artifacts to another directory, as you can imagine, because they are within the same project and sharing the same file structure. You can say, oh, I want this to go here or go there. So another handy feature of Quarto projects. And then this last one is, I think, really, really cool. Quarto projects let you freeze rendered output. And so what you do is you specify, like, I don't want this file to rerun unless something has changed or something like that. Or you could say, like, I would like all files to render every single time things change. So just to go and show an example of what a Quarto project metadata file looks like. In this case, we are specifying, say, we want the table of content to show up across all documents in this project. So TOC is true. And this is a special file called _quarto.yaml. And the project inherits like all the metadata in this file. And so when you create a new Quarto, say if you do file, new Quarto project, Quarto blog on RStudio, it will automatically create it as a project so that you can configure this metadata across all of, say your blog pages as opposed to individual ones. And yeah. And just to touch on freeze really fast, another reason like this is really helpful is that things can be really time consuming based on like the computations that are required in your document. And so by specifying like, please don't rerun this during a global project render, it really can save some time. And another really great thing about freeze is, say, you're on a team where people are working with different programming languages, or people, there's like a large number of collaborators, and your documents might be like old, and so like they might not be, they have different environments, they have different languages, they're just not able to render the project in full. By using freeze, this means like your teammates like don't have to have everything installed to be able to render the project, because it's frozen. The output won't automatically rerun every time you run project or Quarto render project. And so it's very helpful for reproducibility when rendering your site as well. And so styling Quarto. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, there is a lot of styling that Quarto can undertake. There are 25 default themes, or themes that are like brought in whenever you install Quarto from Bootswatch. And if you have ever taken a look, definitely go to the Bootswatch website and just check out what all of these look like, but there are quite a few different options. In terms of how to add them to your file, you can use it in your YAML by specifying it under your format. And in this case, we're going to change the theme to Flatly. So let's just see what that looks like. I'm going to go back to HTML. Reload. Yes. And so here I can say I want the literal theme, for example. It's a theme that I really like. And then saving and rendering. If you recall the previous document, now it has applied the literal theme to this document with a different font, just to like make it much clearer. Let's switch this to United, which is another theme that comes installed with Quarto. Ta-da. And as you can imagine, there's also like more customization that you can do that's say specific to your company, specific to the project that you would like to do. And there are lots and lots of variables in the resource file. I have a link to all of them that if you would like to take a look. And so this is an example of what a SAS file looks like if you want to kind of like go really, really deep in customization. So in this case, the body background, which is body-bg, now has a different color. I'm saying that I want a text shadow on all of the different headings. And so to apply this, you add it under your theme. In this case, the file is called custom.scss. And so you can just continue like adding to that file and then just specifying it within your document like so. So let's just see what that looks like. Just so that it matches flatly. Custom.scss, I believe is the name. It should be in this repo. If you want to open it up, this is essentially what I just showed. Render this file. And now we have, in addition to the Flatly theme, we also have that very specific customization that we want for the background and for the headings. So as you can imagine, it's really, really easy to tweak your documents or websites or blogs using these files and, just really making it look exactly the way that you would like. And here's an example, and that's what it looks like. And one other thing is Quarto also lets you toggle between a dark theme and a light theme. Also really nice, like if you want to give that option to your readers. And the way that you do this is you specify the different themes that you would like for light and for dark. Flatly and darkly look kind of similar, so they're a really good example of making your website have a light and a dark theme very easily. So you've created your awesome Quarto document. Now, what do you do? How do you share it? There are various different publishing options. And so there's, of course, like you can also render your document to PDF or Microsoft Word and share it like that. And but if you want to host it on a website, there are lots of options that Quarto supports. QuartoPub is a free service that is publicly available and has some size limits, but is a really easy way of sharing your documents. There's also GitHub pages that you can configure. RStudio Connect is an enterprise level option for sharing, say, documents with authentication across your organization or things like that. Netlify, which is a popular website hosting service that also, like if you get a certain tier, you can also add authentications and things like that. But QuartoPub is one such example that is free. And in terms of like being able to share things like very, very quickly, as long as, of course, there's no restrictions around that you can try. And I'm going to attempt to do it, but I realize like since I've been using RStudio Cloud, it is a little bit different in terms of how you publish. So hopefully this works, but I go here. Maybe I shouldn't because it's being recorded, but in any case, you would copy and paste the token. You would add the token to your profile, and then all you have to do is type Quarto publish, Quarto pub in your terminal to be able to upload it. This is if you're using RStudio Cloud. If you're using RStudio, it's even more straightforward in that you, if you have a Quarto pub account, you do Quarto publish, Quarto pub, and then the name of your document. When you hit enter, it's going to ask you to authenticate. As long as you're logged in, you can do that fairly quickly. And then it will ask you to confirm your document that you can publish up to your website, to your Quarto pub website. All right, so that is all I have for today. I really hope that you enjoyed this intro to Quarto. Please keep in touch. I'm Velásquez on Twitter. Like I mentioned, the Quarto documentation is really, really good. It's super thorough. It has lots of examples. And I really I recommend just kind of reading through all of the pages. Even in creating this presentation, I just learned so much reading through the Reveal.js chapter. Awesome Quarto is a GitHub repo that offers a curated list of resources for you. And it also has, oh, it's so awesome. I wrote it twice, but really recommend it. In addition to having examples and their source code, it also provides a list of extensions. And so you can see what the community has built in order to, really improve your documents. And that's it for me.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. And
That
have
was awesome.
Like,